So I'm gonna have to turn your video off just for the intro section, otherwise everybody will see you. So if you guys just want to just turn your video off for a second until I hand it over to Liam, and then once I hand it over to Liam, we can go from there. All right, and I will be starting it pretty much right now. Hello, everybody. We're going to give everybody just a few seconds or maybe a minute or two here to log in, just to make sure everybody can get logged in before we begin. All right, and we're just going to give everybody another 30 or 40 seconds. We'll start here at just after 1 or 2 minutes after the hour here. All right, I think that we've got the bulk of everybody who wants to attend today. Thank you for everybody for joining us for this month. We just want to welcome you to this webinar series for July. This webinar will begin shortly, but before we begin, let's just do a few quick housekeeping items. First, I'm pleased to announce that the 2021 SLCAN conference has been announced. This year, it's going to be a virtual conference in October 18th to 20th, and we'll focus on resilience, planning, and adaptation beyond COVID. So please stay tuned to SLCAN for calls on abstracts, registrations, and sponsorship opportunities. It's going to be a really exciting conference this year. It's going to be a new format, and we're really excited to bring it to everybody. Just a reminder for this particular webinar that questions are going to be answered at the end of the webinar. If you have a question during the presentation, we encourage you to enter them in the Q&A button that you're going to be finding on your Zoom login screen. Those will be kind of saved for the end, at which point we will hand them over to the panelists and they can answer them for you. And please note that this webinar is going to be recorded today, and that's so that we can post it on the SLCAN website for your reference at a later date. We would ask that this presentation is for members only. If you are not a member or if your membership is lapsed, we would ask that you please contact us and we can assist you with that. And now for the good stuff. This month, we are pleased to present something kind of a little different. The webinar today is going to be a panel-style discussion between Drew Hauser, the Director of Design and Business Development for Macadam Sather, Willems Ransom, the Principal for Macadam Sather, Liam Brown, the Senior Associate at Macadam Sather, and Ty Shattuck, the CEO at McMaster Innovation Park. And their discussion today is going to be on designing a laboratory community and how to design labs without stakeholders. Now, before we begin, I'm going to give everybody just a quick rundown on their backgrounds. Drew Hauser is an insightful leader with a real passion for sustainable post-secondary and laboratory design. His designs reflect a unique ability to resolve complex programming, including more than 4 million square feet of specialized laboratory design in the last 5 years. His priority is to deliver environments that put our clients' objectives at the forefront, which has been instrumental in providing award-winning design solutions that establish a precedent or prototype. Willems Ransom is an award-winning leader who is passionate about research and design. He has proven an ability to draw out the best from his integrated teams, and it shows with his exciting and diverse portfolio. Each are unique spaces, sensitive to their context while prioritizing sustainability. Whether healthcare, education, community libraries, or corporate commercial work, each of these projects are deeply meaningful to the communities they serve. Liam Brown is a senior associate at Macadam Sather, who in his 6 years with the firm has grown the science and technology team and led a diverse portfolio of complex technical projects. He excels at stakeholder management and engagement of both public and private clients. Liam recently joined the board of directors at Sustainable Labs Canada as an extension of the mission and vision for sustainability that drives his work. And Ty Shattuck is the CEO at McMaster Innovation Park, Canada's premier research park. His specialty is building and leading high potential organizations, be they large or small, achieving expansive growth by launching new products, entering new and especially global markets, and helping them reinvent how, where, and with whom they compete. He excels at securing the capital necessary to make great ideas into great realities. And with the introductions complete, now we get to the really good stuff, and I'm going to hand the webinar over to Liam to begin our presentation. So Liam, if you can please begin.
Thank you, sir. I'm just sharing my screen right now and bringing our video online. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Well, it's great to have everyone with us today. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Tyler. Gosh, it's always interesting to hear descriptions of yourself. I'm going to be our moderator today, and as said before, I am one of the directors at McCallum Sather on specifically design and business development, and I've worked on many of our research and lab projects, both on the commercial level as well as in the institutional level, and all different shapes and sizes. We join you here today from Hamilton. I think everyone is in Hamilton today, except for Willems, who I think is in Buffalo. So I'd like to introduce next, only because I bet you my screen's different than everyone else, but Ty Shattuck, who is the CEO, and let him say hello before we get right into our panel discussion.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really thrilled to be joining the panel today. So thanks so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And Willems?
Sorry about that. Yeah, hi, Willems Ransom. We've been working with Ty and McMaster Innovation Park for a number of years now. It's been a really fantastic partnership and collaboration. Looking forward to talking about it.
And last but not least, our SLCAM board member, Liam.
Thank you, Drew. Yeah, there's a pretty big stipend for me to do this as a board member. So under the table, of course. So happy to do that today, and really excited to share our experience in Hamilton building this fantastic community.
So we've had a lot of discussions, and today as the moderator, I've put together some questions that some of you guys are aware of a few of them, but I've also snuck in a few that you may not be aware of to kind of open up this discussion. As well, I know that as part of this presentation and our this period, if you do have any questions, there you can fill those out, and we can address the questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to do that. On the first kind of slide, this is an image of some of the public meetings and stakeholder engagement that occurred at MIP during some of the master planning process. And the first question I had, and I know that Ty will have some very interesting words to say about this, but how did financing factor into the stakeholder process? I know that you had some really unique groups, and I'd love to hear from you on how some of that stakeholder engagement occurred and how financing factored into the stakeholder process.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. And I think as most people know, is when you undertake big projects, you always have to have an eye for how you can afford to do this. McMaster Innovation Park, MIP, is a unique research park. As a little bit of context, we're a for-profit entity owned by McMaster University, but we're not the university proper. So you can think of us as a company that has one shareholder that happens to be McMaster University. But that represents or offers both some constraints and some opportunities. So we have a restriction that we are not allowed to secure government funding for what we do. The rationale for that is our mission is to help companies grow. And if we're chasing government monies, we're potentially competing with McMaster, or we're competing with the ventures that we're intended to support. So everything that we do at MIP is done with private capital in a sustainable way. So one of the things I'm really proud about is MIP doesn't bring in any government funding support its operations. We're 100% self-sustaining. on operational dollars, which is really unique. So you can think of it as a self-sustaining innovation ecosystem. When you go down the path and say, oh my goodness, you want to add almost 3 million square feet of space with the life science theme, and you dollarize that, and you find that, you know, north of $1.5 billion, you quickly realize that, you know, I don't have a bank account with it in there. And so you start to think about, well, what is the business case that would attract private capital? So the stakeholder meeting that you're making reference to was, well, let's invite investors and financiers to the table right out of the gate to understand what their expectations were from a return perspective, so that as we build out the master plan, as we build the business case, as we build up the leasing strategy, it's not an afterthought, it's baked right in. And that's what we did at those stakeholder engagements. And I think what was really cool for me is I expected the finance people to come in with a very numbers approach, right? And they would give us their rates of return and their IRRs. And they did that, but more than that, they were actually super engaged in the process, that they got to, you know, be part of the formation of the idea. And so it was really, really exciting, and they were excited to be part of the formative stages of this, not just, hey, we've got an idea, would you like to finance it?
So this is great, Ty, and I guess this is part of how it formed the basis of the business plan for the park altogether. But it's interesting when you brought all these stakeholders together. Why MIP? Why did they choose this as their investment or as their place to lay down roots?
So let me say that I think it's a little premature to say that they've decided to invest. So we're in the process of raising the capital. I don't want you to say that I've got that money in the bag, because that would, well, that's simply not true. I would say, why are people interested? I think there's a number of factors. I think when you look at the opportunity, and I'm biased because, you know, we designed it, I think it's a really great business opportunity. I think it's going to do some amazing good and economic development. But it's fundamentally a sound business model that's going to generate the rates of returns that people are looking for. In parallel with that, and I wish I could tell you that this was through cunning strategy, we were developing a life science park, which is, everybody knows, especially given, you know, where we are in this pandemic, it's a really required thing. And so when we started this, Drew, I would say we were a bit of a square peg in a round hole as it related to commercial real estate. Fast forward to today, and everybody's talking about life sciences. So whether it was cunning or whether it was luck or bad luck, frankly, on a pandemic side, we kind of picked a hot market to get into. And so I think that's why we're seeing interest. It's a necessary thing. It's at top of everybody's mind, and it's going to generate good rates of return.
I mean, you also, getting off of, I guess, some of the financial component, you had some really great local partners that in the past you've discussed a bit with me, being McMaster, Hamilton Health Sciences, St. Joseph's Hospital, among others. How influential, or how have they been as stakeholders, or their interest within the park as a whole?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand that we're not just building a glorified industrial park. We're building a research park. And we have a higher order purpose than just to have a bunch of buildings that are leased. The real mission is, how do we leverage these assets towards bringing brilliant discoveries to life? McMaster is the most research-intensive university in the country, and we're partnered with, you know, two of the best research hospitals in the country, and, you know, the most research-intensive college. You know, what we collectively need to do, and if I may, I'll point to what's going on with pandemic, is bring these brilliant ideas to life. You know what people may not know is the vaccines that everybody's running after today, they actually contain Canadian, and more specifically McMaster intellectual property, and yet they're manufactured elsewhere. And so our real mission as a research park isn't to build a bunch of buildings, but build what we refer to as an ecosystem, a place, an environment where we can go from doing great research to productizing that to securing the capital such that it generates jobs here in the region and through the country. And so that's very compelling to our stakeholders, because that's what they need us to do. And so what's interesting is you have the finance people looking at rates of returns, but you have a whole different dimension from the other stakeholders, which is, are those assets going to generate what's referred to an ecosystem?
Because some of those other stakeholders, actually interesting, in our discussions we talked about the government support. So, because I know that that's been huge. I mean, you guys are partly on employment lands, and the local government, like municipal, the regional, the federal government, everyone's had impacts, as well as other infrastructure projects, for example, the LRT. Can you elaborate on any of those, like how lessons learned on partners? I mean, all of them become your partner in these types of projects, and I'm sure there's great components and more challenging components.
Yeah, so you know, I'm not going to air all my dirty laundry. I will tell you, Drew.
Come on, Ty.
I or other people's dirty laundry. That's what I will tell you, is that because we're restricted from chasing government dollars, we do government outreach all the time. We have groups that do public policy. What we decided long ago was that we have what's called a hand up, we're here to help strategy, as opposed to a handout strategy that we need money. So this began before the pandemic, but it certainly got reinforced to that as we reached out to all the levels of government and say, listen, we have something to offer. We have amazing research. We have an understanding of how to do this. We have an understanding of how to build ecosystems. Let us help you. So when you get into your biomanufacturing strategy, listen, we're building a biomanufacturing campus. You might want to talk to us about how you might want to do that. And so I would say the reception of the government at all levels has been very supportive. I would say life sciences, biomanufacturing, frankly, ecosystems are all big words that people understand at a very high level, but not the very complicated nuances. And so it's been really good working with the governments at various levels to kind of help in that. I think where it gets more bumpy, and the municipal government has been hugely supportive, the city and the leadership of the city. I think when you get into the details is where it gets more bumpy. You know, they always say the devil is in the details. Well, the devil's in the details in the zoning and the bylaws and all of those things, where big pictures don't necessarily align with you know, zoning that was defined 40 years ago. A case in point, every innovation district on the planet that's successful is a mixed development. It's all about diversity of companies and people and skill sets to create what we refer to as spatial alchemy. It's the collision of all of that stuff. That's a nuanced, I think this audience, I know you guys because I work with you all the time, I think this audience understands it's that mixture that creates the magic. How that doesn't necessarily translate well into, you know, bylaws and zoning rules, and so it's converting big picture understanding into the details where things get a little more bumpy, and I think I'll leave it there.
So as we progress into, I don't want any laundry coming out. We have a couple of other images, but on the next image, I mean, this is truly near and dear to the McCallum Sather team. On the next slide is with your stakeholders, as well as people that are interested in the park. It's been really interesting looking at sustainable design. And one of the questions I had for you, which I'm curious, what if you had quite an interesting user who was like, you know, we want to be in the park for the following reasons, not interested in sustainable design for our facility? How would you address that? Or what are you hearing out about climate change and these types of parks, and why you guys have chosen to really address climate change and sustainability at MIP?
Yeah. So Drew, that's a good question. The first thing I would say is that every tenant venture that comes to the park, they're going to have different priorities, and we're respectful of that. Our job is to help them. But I think they need to be cognizant that we're owned by a university. We're a mission-driven entity. And the goal isn't to have a bunch of buildings. The goal is to have, a research park in the right place. And I would say, if somebody said there's not interested, I would say, well, that's okay, but that's part of the deal. I think we're in a rather envious position that we're trying to. It's not just about a bunch of buildings. We're trying to build a culture across this park. And so we need a bunch of like-minded people. And so if sustainability isn't your highest priority, that's potentially not the end of the world, but it better not be something that you're not willing to at least, pay for or put your back into, or worst case, resist it. Otherwise, you're just frankly you're not the right partner for us. And so what would we ultimately do is we would say, well, it's nice to meet you. Here's some other areas in the region you might want to explore, but you're not a good fit for us. As luck would have it, we haven't run into any of those. You asked how the reception. I think everybody that we've dealt to, from the capital side to the tenant side to the regulatory side to the government side, all gets it. This is part of the necessary ingredients. And so it's been refreshing. Sometimes you got to look at the costs and stuff of, can you achieve perfection out of the gate versus on your trajectory? But everybody that we've met so far has been supportive. And if somebody didn't get it, best of luck.
Well, and interesting, Ty, because out of the gate, you guys have two things. And I mean, maybe Willems wants to elaborate on some of this, but you've looked at energy budgets as a campus, which is quite unique and very current, as well as having kind of, as you described it, ready to go infrastructure. So maybe a specific building couldn't achieve net zero, but the campus as a whole, that was a goal. Is there anything that you can elaborate on that? Because I think it's quite unique and also hugely challenging.
So let me start on that, and I think Williams can actually add a lot of meat to the bone. So let me say that the kind of facilities that we're designing, and let's pick on biotech and life sciences. Look, these are really hard to achieve carbon neutral. They are. They're energy hogs, and we're not going to get away from that. And so we realized out of the gate that if we took the strategy that every single building, every single asset had to be carbon neutral, that you simply wouldn't be able to achieve what we wanted to on the sector front and the sustainability front. And so instead we said, well, what if we approach it that park-wide we're carbon neutral? What would that be like? And that became feasible, and we realized that what we could have is at a portfolio level, at a campus level, we achieved the goal, even though individual ones would be a little bit plus or minus. And that's when you guys helped us develop that strategy. So Williams, you can jump in here now.
Yeah, no, I would just say that the level of impact when we were looking at a campus-wide solution rather than individual parcels of development, there's a certain efficiency of scale there that we were able to tackle big energy problems through a campus-wide infrastructure rather than an individual building infrastructure. I mean, it kind of goes back a little bit to the comment regarding partners and whether they were interested in sustainability. If you're coming to the park, you really have to be, because you're going to be engaged in a campus energy master plan as we were developing the master plan as a whole. So you can't separate yourself from that. And so collectively, the park is very forward thinking, and we're simply adding more and more robust infrastructure that additionally, I think future proofing has always been something on our minds. So it's not just about the level of net zero readiness necessarily, but also what is the future of energy technologies coming into the park at a later date, and how do we future proof for those technologies to make sure that we're not committing to an energy solution that we can't change over in the future.
So And I know we're going a bit slow here, so I got to speed things up because I got a lot more questions to ask everyone. But given our 3 pillars of sustainability, being finance, social component, and environmental, what would you say, Ty, has been the most challenging to achieve or get in balance on a master plan such as this?
So I would say it's the social and the financial piece. It's keeping those 2 in balance. Again, and I'll try to be more concise, Drew. We're trying to build a culture. You're trying to build a place. At the end of the day, innovation is all about people, and you want to promote what's called collisions when people of different skill sets come together, and that necessitates common areas, that necessitates where you put amenities, it necessitates the overall design of traffic and everything. And sometimes it's hard to quantify in financial terms the importance of that. And that's, well, does it matter where you put parking? Does it matter where you put the restaurants? Well, it actually does. But how do you take these soft kind of cultural, social elements that enable spatial alchemy and then compare them to the hard costs of breaking ground and construction? And it's achieving those things that frankly is always a challenge.
Yeah, I'd say, Ty, we discussed that probably more at length than I mean, certainly there's all kinds of infrastructural challenges and complications to building sustainable lab facilities, but there's that it was designing the cultural aspects that we spent a significant amount of time because it's such an opportunity, right, to define an innovative culture along with an innovation campus. And what that means and the mix of amenities that go into that, and how that culture also sort of defines yourself within a community. And you have, such interesting mix of tenants in addition to the people who are working on the campus. You have a transient community that's coming in and engaging with the campus. You have permanent residents in the community. You have, of course, now remote work integration as well. So we're talking about all kinds of ways of infusing live, work, play into the campus, which is a challenge in and of itself, because you mentioned earlier, certain zoning bylaws that are not necessarily looking at this type of campus as a mixed use facility, but as we know that is essential to the success of the partners and the park as a whole.
Liam, let's go to the next slide because it's interesting. Thanks for the segue into my next question, Willems. It's like you kind of knew what I was going to talk about, unfortunately. Interesting mixed use programming. You started to bring that up because this has been, I know, a discussion from day one, both locally from a planning perspective, but also the challenges of science and research and what you can put on a site. And I know it was very important, Ty, and in some earlier discussions that I always compare to the financial district of Toronto like 20 years ago. No one lived in that district. So after 5 o'clock, after the stock market closed, no one was there. And that was a kind of a fear that could occur. The difference is stock market might close, but science never closes. Those parks, people are working anytime, all the time. So I'm curious, what challenges when you're designing a park where there is no buildings and potentially no people at different times, what challenges came up with that mixed use programming, and how did that get addressed? And I think Liam had some insight on that, especially with the labs and emissions and proximity.
Let me try that at a macro level, and then
sure.
Maybe jump in. And I'm a bit of a broken record here, but look, innovation is all about people, bringing them together. One often thinks, that the innovation occurs at the microscope or at the lab table or in the boardroom. Where real innovation happens is, frankly, when people are breaking bread together. There's a whole theory of innovation called BDO, beverage-driven innovation. It's when you go have a coffee in the morning and you bump into the venture capitalist, or you go have a beer because you had a frustrating day and you want to talk about the problem that you couldn't solve, and you talk to your friends or collaborators and you get creative. creativity happens when you're in these social environments with people that bring different ideas together. And so you need to embed that into the design of your park if you want to create that environment. It's just a must. If you look anywhere, and we spend time looking at other innovation districts all over the planet. But I think where the economics and the others is when people are looking at optimizing the functional use as opposed to the social use, and you don't understand how those things come together, you end up in discussions about, oh, well, I could just fill that with a whole bunch more meeting spaces or labs, or you know, it'd be cheaper to just, you know, drive downtown and have lunch as opposed to have a cool coffee shop here. Or, you know, the zoning bylaws don't do that, so let's just not do that stuff. Or, you know, the #1 tenant request at the whole park actually is for childcare. When you look at the demographics, it makes so much sense. What's so interesting, none of those are about your individual functional lab or office. It's all about the stuff that brings it to life. And how do you quantify that? How do you build that into the plan? And then how do you convince the individual groups, you know, I'm a financer for this building, or I'm the operator for this building. They're kind of myopically looking at that, and you're trying to say that's cool, but we got to look at it at a macro level. And that has been an ongoing challenge. Is listen, we're not designing a building, we're not designing a bunch of buildings, we're designing a park. And getting people to think about that higher level of abstraction is an ongoing challenge.
So Ty, and this is really interesting, as an architect, my like radar is going off like crazy right now, going, okay, so you have a nuclear lab next to like a daycare. And that's where like totally normal. So that's where I know that I have to ask Liam, like there must be some very odd integration that occurs here, and how can you design for that? How do you address that?
Thanks for the prompt, Drew. Yeah, without you know, doing harm to our children with nuclear kind of fallout, it is critical to look at some of this programming that is you know, on paper at odds with itself. You know, some of these critical adjacencies between residential programming, laboratory functional programming, those components, you need these spaces to have, you know, as you see in this picture, you need some buffering to occur between them. There's a whole matrix of vertical and horizontal adjacencies that have to be considered from an emissions standpoint. How do these coexist? You know, what's the scenario for a high throw exhaust, or, you know, how can we elevate certain components and consider that? And that matrix of possibilities is something that has to be explored at a park level, and then also, you know, locally within the buildings themselves. So having the right consulting team to work through those things, you know, not resisting a shameless plug to other board members at the moment who might be invested in such things, but it is critical to have that as a part of your team, to think holistically about where these programs sit on site and how they interact.
So interesting, the shameless plug part, I would have no idea who it is, but I know that integration, all minds being better than one, I guess that becomes a huge dialogue throughout the project as things get further developed, bringing different people in to assess not only the science, but the amenity function of what's going on in the project. There's kind of this design or social design that occurs horizontally and vertically. Can you elaborate on that at all? Or
Yeah.
And if you have to put some plugs in, I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, that's okay. I could use some plugs up top as well.
Oh dear.
The shameless plug would be for an emissions consultant like RWDI or Polutech or someone like that, whereby you bring them on very early at the kind of bubble diagram planning phase and say, these are the things that we want to have on the site, and get that feedback to say, well, these are going to be the challenges associated with that. And then looking in terms of what are the operations of those spaces? How do they function? What's the diversity of those spaces? When are they operating? what's the chemicals that are being used, what's being put up through a stack, what can be filtered and managed within the building without it being an emissions proper, prevailing winds, all of these different components, to your point about a full team solution. You have to have everybody involved considering those things. And it's iterative. What you start out with, there may be challenges as you introduce a new program, or as different stakeholders come on board, or as different tenants come on board and want to fit out something. There's certain blocks that they end up being moved into, like a puzzle of sorts.
So that whole concept goes to my next slide, which you mentioned the ability to adapt or to be able to change, or again, I have to go to like future-proofing the buildings. Explain what this means and how it was addressed. I know Willems did an extensive amount of work on this slide, which is 606, which is one of the heritage buildings on the site. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, that future proofing. And then I'd also like to talk about adaptive reuse. So Willems, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a lot of lessons to be learned from the past. I think it was really forward thinking of the Innovation Park to acquire this historic property, and then to very boldly say, no, we're not tearing this down. We're going to adaptively reuse it into lab facility, and not just lab facility, but kind of a heart of the campus for its culture. And I think of course, it was not purpose built for that. So there's a certain I think
Willems, it was purpose built to make torpedoes.
I know, exactly.
It really was. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always exciting when a new building goes up. I mean, as architects, we all feel that. But there's even more exciting, I think, about seeing the evolution of a building, or the reinvention of a building, because it already has that stature in its time and its presence in the community. So you learn from the past, you bring the past up with you, and I think that bringing the past up into our more contemporary, more novel idea of how we live and how we work and how we make things is really important. So in some ways, the 606, this heritage building, is a little bit of a little bit of a test for the park as a whole. It kind of embodies all of the aspirations. How do you future proof and make sure that you're building an infrastructure that can be adapted into the future? How are you bringing people and laboratory facilities into the same area and doing that safely and effectively? And how are you defining a live, work, play culture that is an asset to the community? I mean, we talked very much at length during the master plan with Ty's mentioning that the people are the heart of innovation. So the first thing you need at the park is people. And how do we get people to the park? How do we get people living at the park? How do we get the community to the park for reasons other than specifically working for a biomanufacturing facility or something? Who would come to the park just to get their dry cleaning done? Simple kind of notions of how do you infuse this park into the whole community. So that was very much a focus of that development.
So you build a landmark, but are there challenges with so many people wanting to come to the park? It becomes a tourist attraction almost. So what do you foresee any challenges that might exist there?
Yeah, there are challenges, and of course, the least fun to talk about, but the one that comes up the most is parking, and site circulation and things of that sort. I mean, a large percentage of the conversations, especially around future proofing and things of that sort, is how do we make sure that we can accommodate the amount of traffic coming through the park, especially manufacturing traffic. And then, what are the long-term aspirations of transportation? And of course, MIP is at the forefront of a lot of those questions. So yeah, I mean, that's been that's been one of the more interesting aspects of the project, despite the fact that parking is one of the most boring subjects we have to deal with. Is what autonomous vehicles mean, for the future of the park, and how do we plan appropriately? What does the LRT or light rail infrastructure mean for the park, and those sort of sets? But then also, appropriate degrees of separation and security and confidentiality are also big questions. How do you have a community that operates an innovative culture as a whole, but still respects the individual tenants' need for confidentiality and to explore things in their own space?
We could hang out on this slide as a heritage consultant for a long time, but I'm going to say let's go to the last slide, because I just know I love being involved in 606. It's like totally amazing project. The last slide I'm going to ask all of you, and it'll be quite interesting to hear responses, but what is the most kind of pleasant surprise that you've had of this process, but also maybe the scariest issue that's arisen? So I think everyone who's listening and joined us today is probably looking for some sort of something, to learn from, a lessons learned, but also something hopeful about these spaces, and they're very meaningful, and they are changing the world. So enlighten us. Maybe Ty, you take that one on first.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear the scariest.
Well, yeah, I think I'm like I said, a broken record. You know what is the most pleasant surprise is, I think when we embarked upon this journey, and Drew and Williams and Liam, you guys were there with us. There was a lot of skeptics. Like, wow, you want to do all this? This is a really big, bold vision for Hamilton. Are you sure that you want to do this? Why don't we just focus on a couple buildings, right? And are you sure? Maybe this is a 35-year project, and we should just kind of take a staggered approach. Let's not bite off more than we should chew. Oh, you want to do life sciences? Well, those are really hard to do. Wouldn't it be just easier to do some office towers, more traditional stuff? We'll just build them up one at a time. And frankly, there was a lot of skeptics and a lot of different places that said, no, that review of this, let's do just an incremental approach. And we took this, let's go build a big, bold plan, because that's going to attract people. And so the pleasant surprise is that we've been able to attract tenants. Like, the most pleasant surprise to me, which is also, my next challenge, is I couldn't imagine, 2 years ago, how on earth we were going to fill up 2.8 million square feet of land, what we were going to put in it. And, sure, it's a bold plan, but if we build it, will they come? Drew, I'm sitting here worried about, I don't have any more space to build. They're coming.
So that's right? The scariest part too.
And they're coming fast, and I got to get my financing done so I can build it. So there's something when they come that I can give them keys for. And so the pleasant surprise was, if you put a big, bold plan, it attracts other big, bold thinkers, and it attracts big, bold investors. And I think it's really good for Hamilton and us to know that you need to kind of walk with a swagger, and that it's possible to do amazing things, but you got to have vision, and you got to have some boldness, and you got to have courage. And the scariest thing is then you got to deliver, right?
Well, and it's interesting, Ty, the number one employer or employment sector in Hamilton is now health sciences and research. So I think that health science component, this is a really great fit for the region as well. I think it connects many different pieces of the puzzle. So that's pretty awesome.
Look, it happened, Drew, and again, I don't want to. Sure, I'll take credit, but whether it's cunning, look. The prowess of the university and the hospitals and research has always been there. What else is Hamilton known for? Manufacturing. And what we see now is the intersection of that. We're building the largest biomanufacturing campus in the country, and it's combining those two capabilities.
Correct. Right?
Yeah. And that is so so it's not entirely a surprise. We said embarked it, but strategy is always kind of fuzzy on the outer edges. And when you get there, you're sometimes shocked that it's not what you hope for. And in our case, it's really cool.
Well, I think I was going to open that up to Willems and Liam, but I'm going to say I'm going to check right now with Tyler to see if there's been any questions. I can't see that in the presentation monitor, but I do want to thank SLCan for having us here today. I know that it's been immensely enjoyable working with the entire team, all of the integration that's occurred at MIP, all of the different consultants, architects, contractors, municipal bodies. It's in a really super project to be involved with. And I think the evolution and synergies and the alchemy is going to help to transform this part of health sciences for Canada. So thanks, Ty, for joining us. And Tyler, if you could let us know if there was any questions.
Yeah, there aren't any questions so far, but I just wanted to thank you guys. That was a really engaging and interesting conversation. It's one of these things where, I wish we had all day, to be completely honest. Just a reminder to the attendees, we can't have you come on with your microphones and physically ask the questions. So you can either ask them in the chat or in the Q&A portion of the Zoom platform, which is just kind of along the bottom bar there. And then our panelists will be, I'm sure, more than happy to answer them. We still have the better part of 15 minutes, which is lots of time for questions. But I can start because, I get to, because I'm the host. So I'm a vendor representative. That's kind of my day job, and we're seeing something very similar to what you guys are talking about, which is these big design teams bringing in specialists and consultants earlier on into the process than we're normally used to being seen. Like as a vendor, normally you're at the back end of the thing is built, it's designed, you've got a square box, and they bring us in and say, put your stuff in the box. And then we run into some problems sometimes. And what we're seeing are these teams that are recognizing that bringing in every level of involvement into these situations is really helping the project as a whole, helping delivery times and helping everybody achieve that. And I'm just curious to see if you guys believe that is an industry trend, or is that something that's only going to be happening on these major projects? Or, what do you guys feel that synergy is working for you?
I guess I could take a quick stab at it. I think for these projects especially, we're seeing the real value of integrated project delivery and having stakeholders and consultants engage really early in the project. We really, I think, especially transitioning from a master plan into an implementation strategies, I think we're learning that the earliest decisions made in the project definitely have the highest impact financially and for the long-term success of the project. Certainly, I think more of, if not true, integrated project delivery, a sort of form of that is definitely a trend that I see.
I would add on that as well, is that as architects, we tend to be generalists, and on a project of this magnitude, but also on smaller ones, sophistication of what is required to satisfy client needs continues to rise. And now more than ever, those key trade partnerships, at least for me personally on projects, is something that I rely on heavily. I'm not shy at all to reach out early on and say, this is something that I would love to hear your experience on, your expertise, so that our team holistically can be measured by that inclusion of that insight and that experience. So I think that's a growing trend, and it's also part of what drew me to Sustainable Labs Canada, because it's a diverse group of people who are all engaged in similar things.
Well, thanks for the SLCan plug there. It is very much our intent at SLCan to try to bring everybody together in exactly this form. So thanks again, everybody. This is really fantastic. I'm just curious, Ty, what's the next step for you? You've got this fantastic plan made by all these brilliant minds. You've got race to the finish now to build all these things and get people into the building. So what's next for you?
Well, I think that's going to take a little while to get all of that stuff done. So frankly, where we are now is, is putting the capital plans in place to support the growth, and then just putting a lot of meat on the bone. So the first 3 buildings are well designed. We're going to be breaking ground on a couple of them this year. And so frankly, the next stage is start the building phases and the populate. And that's going to keep us busy for a number of years. And then I would say, we continue to, you got to keep in mind, our real mission isn't to build all these buildings. Now my mission is going to be, how do we leverage this stuff to really build up the ecosystem and support ventures? One of the things that is of top of mind, I talk a lot about the capital to build the real estate. We also need capital to support the ventures that are renting this real estate. And so I spend a lot of time trying to work with the venture capital and private equity communities to make sure they know what the opportunities are, not just to invest in MIP, but to invest in the ventures at MIP. And so that's kind of the next frontier, because it's really not about MIP, it's about all the ventures here at the park.
And I just while everybody, just a reminder, everybody, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A portion. And my only other comment would be, your prioritization of the collision spaces is something that I haven't really seen before in a project of this scale. It's really interesting to see you prioritize that at that level, that you're really designing the campus around it and that you're putting at such a high value. I'm really excited to see that come together and see what the results are going to be. I'm curious, you said you went around the world and had kind of looked at some other spaces. What were some of the feedback from the spaces that have had that work for you?
So it's really mixed. I think when you look at various places, they all highlighted the importance of that. Whether you go into individual floors and they brag about, where their common kitchen is and where they have their cocktail parties. It's the first thing that everybody actually talks about is, oh, this is where we get together and collaborate. I think when you look at different areas, you see different generations of thinking. So if you end up in Boston, Cambridge, Kendall Square area, every floor of every building and then every parcel has it at different dimensions, and it's really, really cool and amazing. When you look at Mars, for example, they didn't need to think about that because they built Mars in the center of Toronto that already had amenities and hotels and stuff. We have to go build it, which is both good and challenging. But then you go to places like Raleigh Research Triangle, which is one of the older parks, and it wasn't baked into them. And so what are they doing now? They're trying to reinvent Raleigh Research Triangle to come up to what's coming about here. So I'll tell you that, whenever this started 40 odd years ago, it wasn't top of mind, but it is absolutely top of mind everywhere now.
And you as architects and designers, are you guys also seeing that transition over to the private industry side as well, with not just on these large campuses? Are you finding clients that are saying, no, we want those collision spaces, we want these mixture spaces, not just a giant industrial lab?
Wow, that's a good question, because I can say that we still have clients coming to us, and I think there's multiple reasons on that, where they come to us because they're putting such a huge investment in. They want to potentially own their building, but they can only own it in some sort of industrial nondescript area. Others that are looking at it more holistically of how can we attract and retain the best talent, and also be located towards the people who can help finance us for our future growth and commercialization. That is a huge difference between what's happening at MIP and what might be happening with another company. Those financial people and legal people are right on the campus, and they are specialized in understanding and knowing how to commercialize someone's research or science. So I think it's been a cross-section. Liam, you might want to add to that.
Can I, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You said something I want to really highlight about talent. in the industries that we're supporting in biotech and life sciences, the game is won or lost on talent.
Yes.
That's the game. And all of these companies are competing for the best talent. If they get the best talent, they get the best science, but it starts with talent. And frankly, when you look at the demographics of the wants and the needs of the people that trying to attract, they don't want to go to some utilitarian place off in the middle of nowhere. They want to be in a cool, active place. And guess what? They have choices. They can move anywhere in the world. And so it's not really an optional, hey, I think I might have, massage chairs out in the atrium. This is essential to attract the talent. That's how the game is won or lost.
Interesting, Ty, too, because you think about location. MIP, in part of our master plan, we noted that you're near the international airport in Buffalo, you're near Toronto, you've got KW, you're also on the Bruce Trail, you can literally walk across the street to the golf course, you're right at the highway, and you're at a stop on the LRT. So it's incredible. Plus, I mean, you've got great neighbors being Hamilton Health Sciences, Mohawk, McMaster, of course, McMaster, and St. Joe's. So it's quite interesting. Plus your other companies that are already located there, like Westchem just coming back and relocating, and other innovation companies. So it's, I really do believe, I also live in the neighborhood, so that's a shameless plug, but I really do love Hamilton. It's a great place to raise a family. And
I don't think this could have been possible 10 years ago because it wasn't attractive enough to the people that need to populate the park, right? It really is a serendipitous time where things are coming together. Our success is tied to LRT. It's tied to the growth of Hamilton. It's tied to the expansion or the movement of the population out of the Toronto area. It's tied to all of those things.
We didn't really touch upon it in the conversation, but a large part of the master plan was how do we add density to the campus and still maintain meaningful green space and outdoor spaces on the campus. And I still think back, Ty, to when we first walked through the 606 and we thought, God, how are we ever going to fill this thing? But we looked at the master plan and said, it's never going to get this dense, but in the event, we have to have some meaningful green space. Now we're like competing to keep the green space because we're running out of land. We're running out of area.
We can keep a little bit more away. Yeah. No, exactly.
But I think one thing is sort of at the heart of it, and I keep bringing it back to people, but one thing that's kind of interesting about this is as the talent are, as you said, they're demanding certain quality of life and quality of workplace. I think it's a good litmus test, certainly, to ask the question, if people can't live and work safely in the area around the facilities that we're constructing, we're probably not building them right. So I think I almost feel like that social engagement adds a certain level of rigor to the work that we do to make sure that we're designing facilities that support life and support communities. So I think that is truly a great way to measure the success.
I think you touched on something really interesting there, where you talk about this talent can live or work anywhere in the world, and we're in a post-COVID world where you can now interpret your data that you collect anywhere in the world. And we're seeing that change within the spaces where the talent that's working within these labs is doing less data collection because there's automated systems that are doing that for us now, and more data interpretation. They don't have to be physically in a lab anymore. So I think that having a space where you want people to be, you want people to come to, it's a tourist destination, it's a destination to go to, is an interesting way to combat this work remotely, never come back to the office, only come in to check in every once in a while. Is that an intended thing or just a happy happenstance of kind of a byproduct of what you're doing?
So it is absolutely intended. I think, frankly, my opinion is that COVID accelerated work from home balance trends that were well underway. But it really crystallized for us that we need to build facilities that aren't nice to have, but they're absolutely critical. And so I think there's some forms of innovation, and this is an extreme example. If you imagine you're going to make a new phone app, I don't think there's any reason that you should come to the park unless you want to go for lunch and participate in events. You should innovate in your parents' basement. You've got a computer, a futon, and internet access. But there's some industries, and life science is one of them, where frankly you need expensive infrastructure. You shouldn't do radio pharmacological research in your parents' basement unless you want the Mounties coming after you. So there's certain things that you need. And so the design shifted toward, let's focus our energies on making it critical infrastructure as opposed to nice to have infrastructure, and then make it a nice place to work on top of that, so that this is really where you want to be doing your business and living and working and creating.
Yeah, okay. And I just really wanted to thank you guys again for taking this time and for doing something a little bit different. Normally this is a slide deck and we go through this process, and having this live conversation was really engaging, and I look forward to hopefully doing something similar in the future. We've basically hit our hour. So just to remind everybody that this recording will be posted online, so you can find it and share it and show the amazing conversation that just occurred to your friends and families and anybody who'll listen. Just a reminder that we will have another webinar next month. And then like I said, the good news is that in October 18th to 20th, we'll be doing a virtual conference for SLCan. We're very excited to have everybody coming back to have these exact discussions and to kind of further everybody's knowledge and to help everybody support in a post-COVID world. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for supporting SLCan.
Thank you.